This video is brought to you by Incogni. Stick around to hear more about the special offer they're providing to the entire upper echelon community. Alright, this particular video comes at a bit of an inopportune time. See, the concept of them destroying your games could refer to a lot of things, especially for those engaged in the political side of gaming commentary, but for the sake of clarity here, I'm talking about publishers, and I'm also not hovering on the brink, metaphorically speaking. Publishers are, quite literally here, destroying games, rendering them unplayable for you, and thereby, in my opinion, stealing your money, while circumventing whatever laws they can in the process, taking advantage of a regulatory environment where laws to protect the purchases that you make in this category don't seem to effectively be defined at all. It sounds kind of extreme to some, but it's actually a very pressing issue that rose to prominence over the past 15 or so years, give or take. There's plenty of individual examples here, but the best way to start is by showcasing the general industry transformation. Video games have undergone a colossal shift from a physical medium to a digital one. In the past, you had hardware that played the game, files contained on a physical storage device, and a subsequent experience that was effectively irrevocable, for lack of a better word. But now, the transition has been made to an almost purely digital medium, even so far as an open acknowledgement that the physical world of distribution for video games will probably die out completely. Simultaneously, the industry is also witnessing a genre shift. This part is a bit more contentious, I'd say, but the general behavior we see from major publishing companies appears to be hyper-fixated on
we don't really see a lot of Souls-like games anymore. I mean, they used to bump out, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, but now I feel like, actually, no, I feel like we're seeing more Souls-like games now. For other games that the genres kind of disappeared, maybe FPS games I haven't seen kind of rise up. I mean, they came out with a whole bunch of them, 5-6 years ago, and I mean those are still alive today, right? But now they kind of just dissipated. And then I think, but I don't know if that's for the worse or for the better though, because I feel like changing up the genre is definitely going to increase the fun maybe you have on a game. You know what I mean? You don't want to play a game that's always like other games. You want to play a game that's different. But I don't know what the genre is gonna be or how it's gonna change. So there's really no way of me telling.
Games as a service instead of games as a product, which exacerbates the problem of requiring constant internet connections or otherwise forcing dependence on the publisher directly instead of allowing agency over the product that you purchased for yourself. They explicitly do not want to sell you something and subsequently allow you to control it. They would rather sell temporary access to something and then make unilateral decisions about the future of that service with zero accountability. See, it used to be, if you purchased a video game, you had that game until you made a mistake and broke the hardware, like literally and physically. Yep. In some ways that's inconvenient, yes, and modern digital systems allow you to access accounts from any device through login credentials, thereby increasing your relative convenience while doing so. But in other ways, it provided...
Well, I think games that back then used to be simpler, right? They used to cost less hardware, cost less gigabytes, right? And then, right, the less a game costs, the less it's gonna, or the more likely of it not failing is gonna happen, right? I mean, if you think about it, the more hardware used in a game, the more hardware it's gonna take on your PC to run. So, and the more hardware it takes on your PC to run, the more likely your PC is to fail or the game is to fail, right? So I think over time games have realized, oh, we can bump up our game hardware and we can make a better and bigger and faster game. But of course that's always going to come with a cost of needing your PC hardware. So I think with the game development, it also comes your PC needing more hardware to run a game.
Security, because the thing you had ownership of...
And that's why people's games are failing, right? They don't have really good hardware to run the game constantly. They have okay hardware, and then the more they run the game, their hardware wears out. And that's just how that's gonna end. If you run, you know what I mean? If you run Red Dead Redemption on max graphics for years, your hardware is gonna definitely wear out more than if you ran Star Wars the Jedi or Star Wars Collection, the new one that just came out on max graphics, right? And that game is an old version of the or a new version of the old game, but it's still old, right? So if you ran both those games on maximum capacity, of course Star Wars is going to take up less hardware than Red M. So you're gonna have you're gonna be more likely to crash with a red M, right? Or the
Of
game to
really
stop
couldn't be
working.
discretionarily revoked by a third-party publisher. Nowadays, that's no longer true. And like I said earlier, there's a ton of individual examples to choose from, but I'll just pick a few that I have personal experience with. First up is an example that most contemporary gamers will probably be aware of, and that's Warzone. Call of Duty Warzone is a household name at this point.
I mean, a bad game. I don't like the game.
One of the more disruptive
I think
moments
it's
in the game's history was when Activision completely
weird.
shut down the original Warzone experience in favor of its sequel. Now, for some, that's inconsequential, but the key factor we need to consider is that when doing this, they also revoked access to a very, very large number of in game purchases that many players had made, rendering them not just useless, but completely gone. Some people were upset, others weren't, but the idea of purchasing something you want to use and then having it be rendered completely useless by the issuing company at any point in the future that they arbitrarily choose with no communication to you about it if they don't want to, well, it starts to feel kind of strange. Let's move on to Evolve. Evolve was an asymmetrical PvP experience where hunters would take down a monster, and from my perspective, it was kind of an interesting game. However, in 2023,
Monster
published
Hunter
on the
Evolve.
2K support website, it was announced that Evolve would be taken offline permanently. The servers would be shut down, and the thing that people spent their money on would cease to function properly. Sure, certain components of the game would still function,
Yeah,
but after
I don't really know how games do that. Where once people spend money on them and shit, and the game shuts down, do they get a refund? But I feel like it wouldn't really make sense for them to get a refund because you buy the game knowing you might spend money on the game, and then when you spend money on the game, you know that, oh, the server might shut down eventually, so I might be wasting my money here for temporarily or a recreational game play or you know what I mean.
Very long back and forth with the fan community, 2K would now be destroying the ability for players to engage with each other, even on peer-to-peer servers, which had previously been supported, marking the removal of a product function that people had paid for simply because the company decided we don't want to deal with this anymore. How about another one? The Cycle. This one hits close to home because I actually liked this game. I played it, I reviewed it, but come to find out in September of 2023, they killed it. Steam is actually full of reviews where people are lamenting the fact that it's gone, and sure, it was technically
I have no
free
idea
to
what the
play
game is,
as an
to be honest.
experience, but they had microtransaction bundles from $10 all the way up to $100.
Damn.
And everything you purchased is now entirely useless, regardless of what it was or how much it cost. I can go a little bit more rapid
That's
fire
kinda
here, but the
just how it
examples of
is,
what I'm
though.
talking about are everywhere. EA shuts down games in literal batches, like Bad Company 2, Dead Space 2, and Crysis 3. Indie games, such as Spellbreak, for example, that were gobbled up by the Epic Game Store, have their servers officially shut down. Thankfully, the developers created a standalone
costs
version where
money.
players can host their own servers for that one, which is great. You'd love to see that. But even more extreme, companies like Warner Brothers will delist over a dozen games under the Adult Swim banner in this case, while deliberately refusing to transfer those games back to the developers in order to keep them active and playable. Warner Brothers just doesn't care about the games or the playability or preservation in general, and they're taking advantage of a regulatory environment where there are no protections for any of these things. They can just render content unplayable and obsolete on a whim with no recourse. As if that weren't enough, or to really drive home the existence of a general shift here, PlayStation took a fairly unprecedented step recently where they revoked the digital access license for a demo of Stellar Blade. The details here are a bit complicated, but the gist of it is this. Stellar Blade released a demo to the PlayStation Store early, presumably by mistake in this case. People obviously downloaded the file very quickly, but then Sony revoked everyone's access, causing the game to become unplayable for anyone even connected to PSN, which
Really?
even booted some people
I
out
didn't
of the
even know
demo
about that.
mid-session. That's called a kill switch. And yes, it's a demo, it's not a paid product in particular, but the point I'm trying to illustrate is that there is a
It is a
consistently
demo, yeah.
evolving shift across the majority of the video game industry, where the things that you play are not products anymore. You do not own them, and they can be either shut down, revoked, or transformed at the sole discretion of a publisher without warning, rendering the product unplayable or any amount of content you spent money on completely void. That is a disturbing prospect to me, and it simply did not happen a couple decades ago. One more example, which then becomes the jumping off point for what can you do to stop it, because the fantastic part of this video is that there are a set of actions that you can take thanks to a dedicated YouTuber named Ross who runs a channel called Accursed Farms. The Crew. That's the catalyst here, because in late 2023, Ubisoft announced that they would be shutting down the game.
No
Here's the
way.
issue, though. The Crew is actually a very large, very successful game,
Yeah, that's
or
crazy.
it was over the span of its lifetime, which means there's a lot of people who own it, a lot of people who played it, and a lot of people who enjoyed it. That's a perfect storm, because Ubisoft is also
But I
headquartered
mean,
in
you can say the same thing for games that come out that are out now and then are going to get shut down in the future. All games are inevitably going to get shut down, right? Like World of Warcraft servers. I don't know when that's going to happen, but they're inevitably going to get shut down eventually. And then when that happens, are you going to say this? You know what I mean? So it's like,
France, not the United States, which helps in terms of consumer recourse. And all things combined, it presents us with a bit of a perfect storm opportunity. I'm going to put a link down below to the video on Ross's channel. This guy is good. I would highly encourage everyone to watch that video
Oh, yeah.
and other content that he posts, but here's the bullet points of what matter the most. Ross worked very hard, consulted legal experts, and hunted down specific complaint portals all over the world to devise a series of actions that will give the gaming industry a very real shot at sparking some sort of intervention aimed at stopping publishers from just shutting down games. This is the most comprehensive effort I've ever seen on the topic. He's got a very well laid out website called stopkillinggames.com with 2 G's between killing and games, which is also linked down below, importantly. And he's done all the legwork needed for viewers to help as quickly and conveniently as possible. It is very easy to take action right now. It mostly consists of petitions and complaints, which are outlined perfectly on the website, and I won't explain all the gory details right now. He's already done that very thoroughly, but the main point here is that when discussing this topic, it's typically a very defeatist mentality.
I don't know what
Normally, the
this
criticism
is.
of gaming industry trends, which I myself am guilty of, is just criticism, zero action. But thanks to Ross, we have an actual shot at making a difference right now, so this is no longer a simple display of hollow criticism, it's a call to action. Video games are shifting to a purely digital medium, but with that, in conjunction with certain trends like live service games, always online servers, etc., with that, they are increasingly vulnerable when it comes to planned or deliberate obsolescence. Games are no longer being made as products. They are often being made deliberately as services. But these companies are intentionally operating in a retail consumer gray area of sorts by allowing everyone to keep thinking it's a product and leaning into that idea as hard as they can, still, while completely ignoring even the most basic concept of preservation, even so far as to make it impossible to preserve some games, where the community is openly willing to shoulder that burden themselves if even given the option. What makes all this even more fitting is that this trend, where ownership of games is quickly evaporating completely, is an area where Ubisoft Director of Subscriptions Philip Tremblay said, quote, "One of the things we see is that gamers are used to, a little bit like DVD, having and owning their games.
Right.
That's the consumer shift that needs to happen.
Okay.
They got comfortable not owning their CD collection or DVD collection. That's a transformation that's been a bit slower to happen in games. As gamers grow comfortable in that aspect, you don't lose your progress. If you resume your game at another time, your progress file is still there.
Yeah.
That's been deleted. You don't lose what you've built in the game or your engagement with the game. So it's about feeling comfortable with not owning your game." End quote. That is just, quite frankly, baffling to me, because Ubisoft is a company that absolutely embraces the concept of deleting content and progress, evidenced quite clearly by their full-scale shutdown of a game that had 12 million copies sold, and yet the industry has become so complacent.
But like
during
I
this
said though, it's inevitably gonna happen. If Rainbow Six Siege gets shut down tomorrow because of server issues or too much money or some bullshit, are we gonna complain about how there was so much people playing the game? Like, I feel like it's inevitably going to happen. So why are we sitting here saying, "Oh, why did it happen?" Servers can't last forever, unless I'm missing the point.
shift, they seem to think that no one could ever fight back. Well, once again, offering high praise here to Ross at Accursed Farms, now you can. More and more games are shutting down constantly, and typically that's a result of poor performance. But the underlying logic of it all is that gaming companies want to maximize profits, which means that any always online game that runs afoul of that particular initiative can just get chopped. Companies
I don't
don't
know.
want to spend even minimal resources to ensure continuity of access to products that they themselves are selling, and I think it's time they're held accountable for these practices and forced. Doesn't matter what they want to do, they should be forced to do it with no choice to offer preservation tools of some kind, or clearly articulate timelines of deletion before selling a product, or some form of accountability here. I don't think it's a very controversial thing to say
But
that you
that's
should not have
it's
to
like
buy something and
it's
wonder,
like completely random though.
gosh, I don't know, when's it going to stop working forever? I mean, I like playing it and it's been advertised as.
But you have to what? You have to think that though. Every game is gonna get shut down. Like I've spent money on Rainbow Six Siege, and I know Rainbow Six Siege is gonna get shut down. But I don't go in saying, "Oh, when is it gonna get shut down?" Because I know it's gonna get shut down. When it does, I'm gonna say to myself, "Oh, I knew it was gonna get shut down," like every other game, right? So why, like, I don't get this.
Live service, which insinuates perpetuity, or at the very least a long time frame, but I wonder if they'll just delete it all after a year or two because it's not convenient anymore for them to support, and I'll lose the game as well as everything I spent money on inside it. You should not have to wonder that. And the fact that these companies have skirted any sort of accountability on this topic for so long is kind of baffling. Anyway, the point here is to say that the video game industry very deliberately deletes content it sold you for full price without warning, without clarity, and without regret. Up till now, there's been
Well,
very
of course, it's
little
gonna be
recourse
without regret, right? Every game company that is gonna shut down their game is gonna have a player base, and they're gonna have to do it with regret or without regret, right? And I think that they do warn you, and they say that the servers can get shut down. Every game company does that, right? So,
available, but thanks to the efforts of some dedicated enthusiasts and primarily a high quality YouTuber, now there is. We should all seize that opportunity and help as much as we can because opportunities like that are not exactly common.
So like this, just a couple of days ago, I launched a single player session of the Kohan Exiles just to find a couple of games. Items don't have any war pants to be specific. Were gone. Turns out it's because I wasn't connected to the game store / servers. I feel like in this circumstance, that's horrible, right? Of course, like if I'm in game and something that I do in game was wrong, or I do something that's so little and an item or something gets deleted, if that item is the least thing to take time to get, or I took hours or days to get it, it's still deleting that item, right? So there's no value behind how long it takes. But for a server to get shut down, or like a game to get shut down after an amount of time, that's completely fine, because games do that every day, every time something happens, right? But if they want to do it to abuse the money income for their other games or something to do with money, of course that's going to be bad. But I think a lot of games don't have that in their mind. Maybe they do. Maybe it crosses their mind, it flies above their head. But you have to think about the deeper what is it? Why they were like the other whys, right? You have to think about the other whys and be like, oh, maybe this game did it because it was too expensive, or there's no engagement rate, right? But let's say there's on that no engagement rate, there's a lot of people or a lot of YouTubers that play that game. Now that game is going to be shut down. They post them on Twitter, post them on their update page, and they're like, servers shutting down on July 1st. July 1st comes and they all make videos about, oh, this is bad. This was bad. They had no regret for this. They didn't do this. They didn't warn us. But like, it's inevitable because the game had no engagement rate, because there's YouTubers playing the game and everything. They're going to make videos on it and shit on the game for shit that they had to do. Right? But at sometimes this is right? At sometimes this could be correct. And I think a lot of games do also do it for money, right? But I think yeah, but hey, I like the video. I liked it. It's gonna be in the description. Yeah, see ya.